Where did that line come from?
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk.
Like, do you think of this stuff before you sleep or something?
So, rule one, if you're going to do public speaking, and so many people say, oh my God, my daughter's getting married next Saturday. I'm terrified. What do I do? And I tell them all, write your notes, think about what you're going to do, simplify it into 1, 2, 3. You're going to say 3 things, and all of us can keep 3 things. We can't keep 7 or 8 in our head, but 3 we can. And when you've done the notes and worked on it, tear them up and chuck them in the bin and stand up with your chin up and look into the eyes of the audience. And remember that everybody in the room is on your side. Now, when I spoke on that day, of course, virtually no one in the room was on my side. I'd been out. That event was at 3:00 in the afternoon. And this was the new president of Europe. We were told that somebody was going to be appointed. He would stop the traffic in Washington and Beijing. I kid you not. And it was a job that Tony Blair wanted but didn't get. And instead we get some reject from a country called Belgium, which most people couldn't even point out on a map. And he was the dullest little man you have ever seen in your life. And I'd sat there and I'd listened to this 17-minute dirge from him. Yeah. Now, the planning for that speech, you want the truth, mostly happened over lunch that day. I went out to lunch with a couple of colleagues and we went to a little Italian and we had pasta and a glass of red. And I kept thinking, Herman Van Rompuy. I mean, I'm in politics. I've only vaguely heard of him. No one else has got a bloody clue who he is. So who are you? I thought, I'm going to ask, what right have you got? Why have you got power over my life? Why are you being paid more than President Obama? Who the hell are you? That was going through my head. As for where you have the charisma of a damp rag came from, I have no idea to this day. It just happened. And, when you speak off the cuff, there's a risk that you might say something silly, but you also might just, without planning, produce a little gem. And that one absolutely caught fire. I'll tell you the rest of the story very quickly.
Please,
and I will share this on stage in Melbourne.
Sure.
But so I did it, and they all went crackers. Speaker after speaker getting up saying I brought disrepute upon the place. I should apologize. And of course I just ignored them, And the next morning, or that evening, I was called to the president of the Parliament's office at 9:00 the next morning. Now, after a tempestuous time at school, I'm fairly used to, the headmaster's office at 9:00 in the morning. So I go in there and he says to me, he wants me to apologize to Mr. Van Rompuy and his immediate family for the pain I've caused them, apologize to the European Parliament for bringing it into disrepute, and then the funny one, apologize to the people of Belgium for being rude about their country. Well, I could barely contain my laughter at this point. Anyway.
Just for context, you called it basically a non-country for people that didn't.
Yeah, it is complete non-country, split down the middle. One half speak Flemish, one half speak French. They hate each other. There's no national newspaper. There's no national TV. I mean, the whole thing was a British invention in 1839 to try and stop the French and Germans bashing hell out of each other. It didn't, in the end, work out very well, as we know. But anyway, so I did all this. And he said, if you don't apologise, we will put upon you the maximum fine that the Parliament can put on a member. I mean, so I was about to be fined the same as if I'd been found guilty of corruption, just for giving an opinion. Anyway, I told him where to go and said, fine me, that's fine. Couldn't care less, mate. And I walk out, and there's like 30 photographers there. They've tipped the press off. And the press all think that I'm going to back down. The press all think I'm going to apologise, wear sackcloth and ashes. And they're all screaming, have you apologised? Have you apologised? And I put my hands up. And I said, ladies and gentlemen of the press, there are times in life when a man goes too far and he has to admit he's done wrong. And I apologise now to bank clerks all over the world for any offence I might have caused them. It was a lot of fun.
Gentlemen, please.
Oh dear. Nigel, Can I ask you about the difference in COVID response and government overreach, and the social and difference in public sentiment between the UK and Australia? What do you think the point of difference is there?
You know, the similarities are remarkable, and we can talk about America, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and you find that all the social ills that affect one affect the rest. So the answer is, in terms of COVID lockdown policy, we headed in exactly the same direction as you, albeit with slightly differing speeds and slightly different responses. And obviously in Australia, different states responded in different ways, as indeed happened here with Scotland, Wales, and England. The one thing I would say in this country that astonished me was the way in which government used fear to get their way. And we had a whole series of national television adverts, national radio adverts, national newspaper adverts, you know, basically showing an older person, you know, can you look into their eyes, you know, because you might be carrying the virus, you might kill your granny. And this narrative of fear was very, very effective. We had a series of lockdowns. In the end, when it came to Christmas 2021, Omicron had arrived from South Africa. And Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, still just, addressed the nation on a Sunday evening and used the word emergency 4 times. So it was pretty clear he planned to shut us down for a second Christmas in a row. But the woman in South Africa who had identified the Omicron variant told us that in terms of its damage, it's somewhere between the common cold and flu. You know, it's no worse than that. And in the end, it took a long time, but there was a rebellion. The rebellion took place in the press. The rebellion took place with a few broadcasters like me just saying, look, you know what? You can lock us down. I'm going to ignore you. And then over 100 Conservative MPs rebelled against Boris Johnson. And that was the beginning of the end, you know, of those lockdowns and of those strict rules. I mean, we looked on, I have to tell you, we looked on at what was happening in Victoria, what was happening in Western Australia. I mean, it was just astonishing. I mean, you guys, what happened here was bad enough. What happened in Australia was extreme beyond belief. I mean, to the point of virtually locking up the #1 tennis player in the world when he came to play in the Australian Open. So there are strong similarities. I still struggle to understand why so many citizens went along with all of this and didn't rebel earlier. But I guess the answer is fear.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's nothing much has changed here, unfortunately. I'm glad you're back to some normality in the UK, but we seem to be still treading water here.
Oh no, we're back to. I can tell you right now, we're back to pretty much full normality.
Yeah.
Yep. No. Life now is exactly as it was before the pandemic. There are 1 or 2 changes of behaviour that have happened. I mean, people have got in. People aren't going to the pub as much as they used to, which I think is terrible. I think it's terrible. I mean, the pubs are the backbone of our country and of all debate. But no, life is. I was at Lord's on Friday for the cricket, where we got walloped by South Africa, and life was going on as if it was 2019. So no, I'm pleased to say we're pretty much free of everything. There are still, of course, for those that want to travel abroad, there are still issues around whether you've been vaccinated or not. But you know, I had the 2 jabs. All right, I had the 2 jabs because I'd grown up with BCGs and measles vaccinations, and I kind of stupidly thought, well, if I'm vaccinated, it means I can't catch it. When it came to the booster campaign, I was astonished. I had 3 letters through the post telling me to get the booster. I had texts, I had phone calls on my cell phone, I had emails, a real attempt to get me to take the booster. That wasn't just because it was me, that was happening to everybody. And in the end, what I did was I had a public debate about it on GB News. I had 3 separate doctors over the course of a week come on and tell me why I should get the booster. And I asked them all, if I have the booster, does it stop me catching COVID? No. Okay. If I have the booster, does it stop me passing on COVID to my elderly parents? The answer was no. So why should I have the booster? Oh, because if you get COVID, you'll be less ill. I said, well, surely that's my choice and not yours. So I didn't have the booster. And now, of course, with our elderly, they're now giving them a 5th jab as winter approaches. So I was one of those. I was slow to become skeptical about the efficacy of the so-called vaccine. But now I think the real thing now is not the vaccine. The real thing now is damage done by lockdown. And, we now in the UK, and I don't know the Australian figures, but we now in the UK, because we literally closed down our hospitals, we closed them down. We stopped doing normal scans, treatments, diabetes checks, all those things. We stopped. And we've now got 300,000 people in the UK who've had a positive cancer diagnosis who are not being treated. Not being treated. Excess deaths and we've now had long enough to look at this for it not to be a standout freak in statistics. Lockdown deaths in the UK are now 1,000 a week more than they should be for this time of the year and our size of population. And wow. There are some who'll tell you, well, it's people dying of the side effects of the vaccine, and some are. But basically, we neglected medical treatment for millions and millions and millions of people, and we're now paying a terrible price. And the long-term cost of lockdown, both in terms of health, in terms of money, and in terms of psychology, massively dwarfs and outweighs any potential benefits there might have been to that lockdown policy. And I think that now is beginning to become imprinted upon people's minds. Certainly the national, not all of them, but much of the national press now understand this. And I have to say, only speaking for the UK, but I think if they tried to lock us down again, I think we would collectively tell them to go to hell.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we're there yet. The whole back of house was shut down here of health as well, and we're reaping the consequences of that as you're doing in the UK. But unfortunately, there isn't as many people in the media like yourself that are willing to speak up, and that's the problem we've got here. We are, relying on this type of medium with Joel essentially doing the heavy lifting that the mainstream media won't.
Yeah, but ideas can spread organically, and it doesn't need that many of us to propagate alternative thinking. It's just a question of whether the moment's right for it. And if Australians are ready to take a deeper think about what they've just been put through, you can still get through. And after all, I say that as when I was the Lone Ranger campaigning for Britain to leave the EU, I was the biggest joke in the country, because I had a view that was different to everybody. But you know what? We did get there in the end, and we did change the national mindset. So, yeah, you're right. Of course, the ABCs of this world, don't want to have an alternative debate. But hey, you guys have made an impact already with what you're doing. So just keep on going.
We're getting there.
Graham, please don't be shy.
Okay, yeah. Nigel, no way in the world. Firstly, Nigel, I'm noticing a black dog wandering around in your background, and I'm hoping that's not the same black dog that plagued Winston Churchill.
No, in fact, I tell you, I'm so casual. I've got 2 black dogs in the room. I apologise for that, but hey, for those that watch this, it'll just look a bit better. That's all.
Well, I can better that. I've got a pet kangaroo in the living room at the moment, and John can attest to that. He's seen it.
Wow, that's pretty.
Nigel, we have become aware of a new phase in the tactic of government overreach in the last 2 years. I'm sure to a lot of people it's been clearly obvious way before that. But for me, the last 2 years has shown a government overreach that is beyond anything we'd ever seen before or likely to have imagined. The Americans are fond of the line around government that government is of the people, by the people, for the people. But we're now seeing government of the people, by the corporations, for the corporations. We know that World Economic Forum are having a large impact in this kind of scenario and the debate that's building around that. Where do you see the world heading in terms of the goals and aspirations of the World Economic Forum and the reach that they have?
Well, I mean, I used to say for years that the European Union, Brussels, was the epicenter of the globalist project, which it was and still is. And I used to say that it was the unholy trinity of big politics, big business, and big banks that were basically beginning to control the narrative for our lives, the regulations and laws by which we all had to live and operate. And I suppose, in a sense, that's why Brexit is so significant, because Brexit was that first sort of brick out of the globalist wall. But of course, these people never, ever give up. Whether it's the World Economic Forum or whether it's going back decades to the Bilderberg Group or whatever you want to look at, it is not surprising that people of similar backgrounds with similar ambitions get together and decide to do things collectively. It is also not surprising that for those who are in active politics, they're all looking, once they've finished active politics, to make quite a lot of money. And how do you do that? Well, you do it through the global corporations. I mean, look at Theresa May, our Prime Minister for a couple of years, possibly the worst in our history. I mean, she can barely string a sentence together. And yet she's been paid 2 million sterling by the JP Morgans of this world to go and speak in New York. Now, as Donald Trump said, he said he'd pay good money not to hear her. I'm with him. So yes, we do have this phenomenon of governments and corporations and much of the media too, all acting in concert. So I don't think we should underestimate the threat that we face in any way at all. And whether this takes the form of the Great Reset or whatever it is, I don't know. I mean, none of us really know ultimately what shape it takes. But as I said at the start of this chat, if you look at the 5 older developed English-speaking countries, America, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, you will see that basically in many areas, our governments are behaving identically. And the companies that influence much of this are, of course, the same companies because they're giant multinationals. Are people ready to hear these arguments? Well, I think on that. I mean, I think when it comes to taking away our freedoms, I think the audience is ready to listen to us. When it comes to explaining how and why those freedoms have been taken away, let's be frank, we've got a lot more work to do.
Absolutely, and the other facet of government or over government in most countries of the world is the fact that the bureaucracies have way too much power, and the elected representatives don't seem to have any say for their constituents, having to get through the barrier of bureaucracy. Have you got a plan, or have you got a vision to see that change in our world? So
it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, the one thing Donald Trump was unable to do was to drain the swamp. He did not. He did many other things, but he couldn't drain the swamp.
Yeah.
We have similar in this country in terms of the implementation of Brexit, and that process is still far from finished. Obstructionism at every twist and turn coming from the bureaucracies. So it is a plague right across the Western democracies that they're not operating in a very democratic manner. The answer to this actually may be simpler than you think. It's about the type of people in politics. You see, back in the 1980s, Mrs. Thatcher came in to Britain as Prime Minister. And we had, ever since 1945, been going in a big state, high tax, uber control direction. And it didn't really matter whether you had a Conservative government or a Labour government, that's where everything went. And she came back in with a mandate to roll back the frontiers of the state. And that meant to reduce tax, to reduce government spending, to abolish a whole series of non-governmental organizations, to free up men and women to succeed in business, succeed or fail in business. And, you know, after 35 years of everybody going in the same direction, she faced the most massive challenges. But she famously once said that it's ministers who decide and civil servants who enact, and not the other way round. And I think the problem is, you look at our politicians, you look at their backgrounds. I mean, frankly, most of them are a bunch of college kids. You know, they've come through college, they've worked their way into the political system. They're not in politics to represent their constituents. They're not in politics for the national interest. They're not in politics because they're driven and motivated by specific ideological goals. They're in politics for a career. They're in politics to climb the greasy pole. And Australia has a particular problem with this, if I may say so as an outsider. And it's this. The Liberal Party of Australia, which is the party, the big party that we would hope would propagate some genuine conservative views about liberty, freedom, all of those things. When it comes to them choosing their leaders, who chooses? The elected representatives. There's no means for activists. There's no means for members of the organisation to really have a say. And so what keeps happening is the Australian Liberal Party keeps picking people who are frankly centrist or even in some ways left of centre, as opposed to genuine conservatives. And this is something that we can do things about. You know, we've got to make sure that our so-called conservative parties are actually conservative. And when they are, I think you'll find that different people, you know, not just careerists, but people who want to do stuff and change stuff and be radical in the proper sense of that word. Once you get people like that in office, it becomes much harder for the bureaucracy to frustrate.
I think it was Steve Bannon that made the point that when President Trump wins, or whichever Republican wins, they need to literally come in with an army of their own bureaucrats so that they can replace all of these people, so that Trump can just go Control F, get rid of them all, and put these people in. But Nigel, on the electoral reforms point, you've been making some suggestions recently about perhaps bringing in proportionate representation and a number of other electoral reforms, like removing the House of Lords. Is that another one as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, we have a 19th century system of government for the 21st century. We're freed from Brussels. We're able to make our own laws. We're back to being an independent country. Now is the time to make change. First past the post served us pretty well when there were two clear political divides. It no longer does. Even in radical general election swing. And a lot of people just don't bother to register because they just can't be bothered with it. So I think we need some degree of proportionality into the system, and that would mean not ridiculous minority views, but significant views that have got the support of a lot of people would get a voice in Parliament and would be able to influence the bigger parties. That would be a much more democratic, open situation. You, of course, have a preferential system, which can lead to all sorts of confusion. There are systems. There is a thing called AV Plus, where we would keep the member of Parliament for a district, albeit a slightly bigger district, and the last 25% of seats would be made up proportionately. I mean, in 2015, I led UKIP to 4 million votes in the general election, and one seat. One. The 4 million votes. I mean, nothing like it had ever been seen before. Yeah. Had our system been directly proportional, that would have been 83 seats. But the truth is, had it been a proportional vote, I suspect I'd have got 120 seats, 130 seats. So I think that I'm not saying it just from selfish interest, but to open up debate. The House of Lords, joke, absolutely stuffed full of party donors, people who do business favours, completely out of date. And the other one, the really big one, is postal voting. I mean, before 2001, if you wanted to vote by post or have a proxy, you had to have A very good reason for doing so. You know, you were 97 in a wheelchair, you were in the army working abroad. And about 2 to 2.5% of our vote were votes that were done early by post. That's now up to 20% plus. And of course, we see the row in America that is going on as a result of the way mail-out ballots were just dished out like confetti in 2020. I have seen with my own eyes the postal voting system being totally abused, especially in some of the ethnic minorities where women do not have an equal say to men, but they're all signed up for the vote and they all vote whether they know it or not. So yes, I'm looking to completely clean up the British political system, modernise the British political system, make sure that significant minority views have a say in that parliament. And yeah, I'm going to keep on going.
Nigel, you're an absolute legend. I could keep chatting about this forever, especially the way that you encouraged America after the 2020 election loss and all the fraud that happened there. The way that you encouraged that country was incredible. And I'm very eager to pick your brain at another time about that. But I did want to just finish on the point. Do you hear from Guy Verhofstadt and do you hear from Jean-Claude Juncker anymore?
No, I mean, Verhofstadt hated me, not just because of my views, but he hated me as a human being, because that's the kind of people we're dealing with. Juncker, actually, you know, when he retired, we had a nice exchange of letters, and I got on well with Juncker on a personal level. We had a laugh and a joke, and we need to remind everybody that the left have lost their marbles, completely lost their marbles. They now don't just disagree with us, they hate us.
Yeah.
They think they're superior human beings, and history tells us when one group of human beings believe they're superior to another, very bad, very nasty, horrible things can happen. And the next time we talk, we should talk about the education system and the extent to which we're not teaching young people across the West critical thinking. Namely, there are 2 points of view, you make your mind up, you disagree with the other person vigorously, but you actually do so in a peaceable, sensible manner. Hey, if we got stuck on educational reform, guys, we'd be here all day.
Absolutely,
Joel,
absolutely. Yes, Graham?
Joel, I need to ask one very quick question that will draw a very quick response.
Sure.
Is there currently, or when has there been, and who has it been, that you see as the last great statesman or woman on the planet?
Well, I'm going to say, and this may be very controversial with some, because of his manner and his style, but I think Trump's attempt on the world stage to turn America from being a warmongering nation into being a peace broker was a truly extraordinary thing. And I think the Abraham Accords, in which Israel and several Arab states have signed up to work, in a sensible, mutual way with each other, do you know what? That's an incredible achievement. Had it been done by Obama, we would be told the Lord had come back to the planet again.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Gentlemen,
Thanks, guys.
thank you so much. And if you guys want tickets to see the show, because of course John and Graham will be having dinner with Nigel in Sydney, be sure to get your tickets at www.nigellive.com.au. The tickets are getting snapped up in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Nigel, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous. I'll see you later.
I look forward to seeing all of you in a few weeks' time.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nigel.
Thanks, gentlemen. Cheers.